For decades, banks have built systems that executed decisions, ledgers that posted debits and credits, models that scored loans, processes that approved or denied. Those systems were controlled by human time. They waited for committees, memos, and sign off. Now let's think about this for a second. Today, the systems inside your institution don't just execute your decisions, they make those decisions. Somewhere in your organization right now, and the volume and velocity of this is fascinating to the imagination. An automated agent is adjusting a fraud threshold, rerouting payments, recalibrating credit limits, or reshaping a marketing cohort without waiting for a human hand. That is not future state finance, that is current state banking. The question is no longer whether agentic AI belongs to the bank. The real head scratcher, the thing we really have to reckon with, is whether the bank knows how to govern something that decides. Traditional governance frameworks assume decisions occur at discrete points. A loan officer approves or denies a loan. A compliance manager reviews a flag transaction. A change control committee signs off a model update. Each decision is an event that can be audited or vetoed. But here's the dilemma. With agentic AI, there is no single moment to intercept. Agents operate continuously, making micro decisions as conditions evolve. They learn, adapt, and sometimes rewrite their own logic. Oversight becomes like chasing a moving target. The control problem isn't simply that AI can decide, it's that these systems never stop deciding. You see where I'm going with this? You cannot approve something that never stops deciding. Oversight anchored in static documents or pre-deployment reviews is insufficient. A bank may have extensive documentation describing how a model works, but the moment an agent encounters a novel scenario and adapts, that documentation is outdated. One risk expert quipped, and I think he hit the nail on the head, that banks believe that they are supervising behavior when in reality they are supervising paperwork. Most model risk management relies on stability. You validate a model on historical data, document its behavior, set static thresholds, and require approvals for changes. But all shucks, it's just not that simple anymore. An agentic system is inherently non-static. It changes its behavior based on live data and interactions. There is no single model document that can capture all possible behaviors. Regulatory guidance like SR 11.7 does expect ongoing monitoring and triggers for model changes, but few banks have built real-time monitors capable of supervising hundreds of micro decisions per second, and adding manual approval to every agentic action just doesn't scale. Early pilots in cybersecurity tried to require human sign off for every significant action, but reviewers became bottlenecks and benefits evaporated. So in other words, it didn't scale. Instead, control must be architectural, built into the system, operating at machine speed, and capable of intervening when anomalies arise. Regulators are waking up to the control problem. In December 2025, Britain's Financial Conduct Authority, also known as Britain's FCA, noted that a race among banks to adopt agentic AI introduces new risk. FCA Chief Data Officer Jessica Rusu warned that the autonomy and speed of these agents magnify risk relating to financial stability and governance. It's a bit of a tightrope walk.
the FCA will rely on existing regimes, the senior regime, the senior manager's regime, and the consumer duty to hold executives accountable and ensure customer interests are protected overall, that to ensure that customer interests are protected. So that's very powerful guidance from Britain's FCA chief data officer Jessica Rusu. And speaking of guidance, and in the form of business and research guidance, I'd like to switch gears for a moment. Research firm Gartner predicts that by the end of 2026, 40% of financial services firms will be using AI agents. So that's just under half, and that's very impressive on the surface. Yet it also expects that more than 40% of agentic AI projects will be axed by 2027 as a result of escalating costs and unclear business value. 40%. 40% to be axed. Wow. That's also just under half. That's a very large number. And so this really underscores the need for disciplined governance and clear return on investment. Now I'm going to segue for a moment because, very candidly, my first gut reaction to this Gartner survey data was, that's very interesting. That's half, 40%, and then the other 40%, that's half of a half. So curiosity is getting the best of me, and I said, I wonder what this really means on the surface. And I became interested in taking a mathematical walk of this data. And as I started to take a mathematical walk of this data, it became both fascinating and very sobering for me, because it appears to me that this survey implies that there is a boom and bust cycle hidden in the data, in the numbers of this data. So let's take a look at that first visual. Okay, so let's take a look at this first visual. We've given it a title of the 2027 correction, which we're calling the filtering event, the survival gap. Only 24% will cross the finish line. So if we take a look at the variables that Gartner gave us, there is a 40% adoption rate in 2026. That is what we see at top of funnel here. 40% adopters, 40% adoption rate. That is to be followed by 40% of those projects getting axed, according to Gartner survey results rather, 40% of those projects getting axed by 2027. Using these two values from Gartner's survey, we can therefore conduct a mathematical equation or calculation that will inform us of the actual market penetration that should survive this 2027 correction. Mathematically, we treat this as a sequence. We start with a 40% adoption. We apply a 40% attrition. So 0.40 times 1 minus 0.40. That gives you 0.40 times 0.60, and the result of that is 0.24, or otherwise 24%. Again, that is 24% given the 40% attrition. 24% crossing the finish line. Now, I have to be honest here. There is some irony, just a little bit of irony for me, starting with the 1-to-1 ratio, the 40-to-40. For every company that signs a check to adopt this technology, another company is essentially ripping theirs up. Mathematically, that 1-to-1 ratio is a loud signal of low maturity. It suggests that for every 2.5 companies that commits a project, only 1.5 will actually see it through. So again, only 24% of the total market will likely have functional, value-proven AI projects left standing by 2027. Wow. That is a high failure to adoption ratio. In a stable environment, IT failure rates are much lower, generally speaking. So let's talk about what this bust cost the industry. This multi-billion-dollar learning tax. To estimate the projected loss, we built a model. This model was based on mid to large financial firms, and we looked at roughly 25,000 to 50,000 mid to large financial firms globally. With that, in a conservative scenario, we would be looking at approximately a $2 billion in lost capital. $2 billion. In an aggressive scenario, that number would jump to $8 billion. So from $2 billion to $8 billion. And again, we're calling this what it is, right? It's a learning tax. And it is staggering, very truly staggering. It is an involuntary tuition fee that the industry is paying and will pay to find out what actually works in this space. It becomes a capital allocation inefficiency. Money that could have gone, perhaps, into proven infrastructure, but instead went towards a hype premium for a label that didn't always have the technical value to back it up. A significant value gap, a very significant value gap. So let's look at the third visual here. And this part of the conversation is about the survival scorecard, the AI agent survival scorecard, and how to win. So the question becomes, why are the projects being axed? Why the failure? Gartner points to what it defines as unclear business value. And in our mathematical model, project termination occurs the moment the cost curve intersects and overtakes the value curve. And so if you take a look at the red and bluish aqua curve here, you'll see fairly clearly there is an overtaking of the cost curve versus the value curve, left side of screen. The implication is the moment the cost curve overtakes the value curve, you're in that zone of project termination. That's it. And so here's kind of the all shucks reality of the circumstance. Return on investment. And now we're going to move to the right side of screen. Return on investment is currently a stochastic or random variable rather than a deterministic one. The collective, we want a sure thing, but as of right now, value appears to have a high variance while cost are a guaranteed increasing function. And so, this on the right, this dashboard on the right side of the screen, we called it a return on investment command center. In essence, what you want to, and we'll flip forward momentarily, you want to be able to demonstrate that your value velocity is increasing. You want to be able to demonstrate that in a number of months that you're proving or demonstrating value within 9 or 12 months, and you'll see the key insight there in bottom right, exceeded return on investment target in 7 months, preparing to scale. That's your ideal circumstance. Let me scroll forward in the presentation here. Whoops. In financial services, we often think of value as meeting at the intersection of compliance, accuracy, and speed. And so if we look at this dashboard here, and we think of agentic AI or AI agents, and on the topic of value velocity, the ideal circumstance is that we want to demonstrate value velocity month over month. That is our survival metric. That's what counts. And we have a formula down here: total tangible value delivered divided by time since launch. You should be able to walk into a steering committee and have this conversation about value velocity of an agent and the agents collectively. And if you aren't able to accomplish that, you're probably already in the Gartner danger zone, and you should start planning for some type of pivot of how to exit the danger zone or avoid entering the danger zone. You want to be able to demonstrate value velocity month over month on a continuous basis. Let's flip forward here. So again, here's the formula: value velocity, total tangible value delivered divided by time since project launch. Value velocity should increase month over month. That is your goal. That's your survival value velocity. That is that is the survival scorecard. That is the survival mechanism, value velocity. That's when you know that it's time to scale or it's time to kill, or hit the kill switch, rather. Maybe that's a better way to state it. And last we have a table here with a few success metrics. 4 success metrics: cost of value, deterministic accuracy, response latency, and integration depth. Cost of value, of course, as I have stated and reiterated, your threshold is value curve needs to remain above the cost curve, needs to exceed. Here we say 12 months. We've been saying also 9 months. Ideally, at the 9-month mark, I would say that we want to be able to demonstrate it's time to scale. Deterministic accuracy. Let's talk about the red flag. Anything less than 95% on regulated task is a red flag, because you have to then reintroduce costs. Those costs are human in the loop costs that begin to get reintroduced, where you have less than 95% accuracy. Response latency, anything more than 5 seconds, again, you begin to reintroduce cost. And then integration depth. Siloed agents that might be doing UI only scraping, you begin to lose any type of benefit, and those are 3 times more likely to fail. So these are a collection of 4 success metrics to consider across individual and collective AI agents as you roll out a program of agentic AI or AI in general across your institution. So, what are the big players doing? A November 2025 survey highlighted that major institutions such as JP Morgan Chase, Citi, and Bank of New York are fine tuning models, improving data governance, and setting up monitoring systems to lay the foundation for agentic AI. Executives emphasize that agents can now reason and take action by calling tools and applications, which promises productivity gains but requires high quality data and careful orchestration. At the same time, US banks have moved slowly. Less than 10% have put critical workloads into production with AI, citing regulatory uncertainty and the absence of commercial governance frameworks. I'll tell you, legal advisors to community banks are being very careful here. They counsel institutions to approach agentic AI through the lenses of model risk, consumer protection, data security, and operational resilience. Start with low risk pilots, embed governance up front, and maintain human accountability at every step. For example, if an agent monitors regulatory changes and drafts updated policies, the bank should require human approval of all proposed changes and maintain immutable logs. For underwriting support, agent outputs should be advisory and tested for bias. The absence of standards does not mean the absence of accountability. To solve the control problem, banks must reframe control from permission to architecture. Let's break down what that actually means. Instead of approving each decision, you embed constraints and monitors into the system. Conceptually, control becomes a function of a few things, a few dimensions, if you will. Number one, real-time instrumentation that audits decisions as they occur. Number two, automatic tripwires that throttle or halt agents when anomalies occur. Number three, digital twins or supervisory agents that track the decisions of primary agents and raise alerts when behavior deviates from policy. And number four, human oversight at the level of policy design rather than transaction level review. Continuous validation is the analog here. In cybersecurity, annual audits have given way to continuous threat monitoring, and AI banks will likely implement continuous validation, injecting test scenarios into production, watching for drift and anomalies, and automatically taking models out of production if error rates spike. Regulatory frameworks are evolving. The EU's AI Act requires continuous monitoring for high risk systems. The US Office of Science and Technology Policy is soliciting input on iterative deployment. The consensus? Governance must operate at the same speed as agents.
Now, this is where it gets really interesting and maybe a little bit messy. When banks first adopted predicted predictive models, the focus was on accuracy. If each model was accurate, regulators and executives were satisfied. However, in an agentic world, accuracy of individual agents is necessary but not sufficient. The agents interact, however, for example, a marketing agent expands eligibility to reach new customer segments. The underwriting agent compensates by tightening credit criteria. The fraud agent reacts by raising risk scores. A payment agent reroutes funds to preserve liquidity. You see the challenge or the opportunity? None of these agents is wrong in isolation, yet together they can create a system level failure. Liquidity dries up, customers are locked out, or risk concentrates in unexpected pockets. No model failed, the system failed. Systemic failure. Research on multi agent systems shows that agents acting independently can end up in globally inefficient states if they don't coordinate. It's like smart traffic lights. Each light optimizes local flow, but collectively, they have an opportunity to create new choke points. In finance, an underwriting agent may tighten credit to maintain portfolio quality, while a marketing agent accelerates growth. And the result may be an unexpected shift in the credit mix, triggering capital and liquidity stress. Without a mechanism to reconcile objectives, local optimization leads to global distortion. The We have this framework, the Enterprise Economics Triad. Let's walk through the triad specifically. The Enterprise Economics Triad, consisting of marketing, underwriting, and payments, illustrates the multi-agent risk vividly. Marketing is an optimization problem under uncertainty. Effective marketing systems explore and learn. They adapt offers and enforce fairness. But an agency, an agent that expands eligibility to drive growth might inadvertently reduce average customer quality. Underwriting is a capital allocation problem under uncertainty. Agents translate risk signals into thresholds, enforce capital constraints, and arbitrate growth versus loss. If marketing increases the funnel, underwriting may respond by tightening thresholds or raising price, altering portfolio dynamics. Payments are the circulatory system of the enterprise. Agents optimize routing across cost, latency, and risk. If fraud or liquidity stress emerges, payments agents may reroute or slow flows, impacting both marketing conversion and underwriting cash flows. Because these functions are coupled, an action by one agent changes conditions for the others. Without coordination mechanisms, this can produce drift. The system moves in directions nobody intended. In the lab, they call this emergent behavior. In the boardroom, we just call this systemic risk. So let's talk a little bit about cross-industry parallels. The triad dynamic appears beyond banking. In biotech, lab automation agents plan experiments and analyze results simultaneously. If one agent optimizes for speed while another optimizes for accuracy, the result may be a high volume of low quality data. In logistics, routing agents individually shorten travel times, but collectively overwhelm certain roads. In cybersecurity, defensive agents and adversarial agents continuously out optimize each other, sometimes leading to cascading failure. It's a systemic problem, plain and simple. Be honest with you, banks are in a tough spot here. Banks operate in one of the most regulated environments, yet regulatory guidance often lags technology. In the US, no commercial standard governance framework exists for agentic AI. Without clear rules, banks may assume that existing model governance documentation suffices. That assumption may be dangerous. Documentation describes how a model worked yesterday, not how an agent will behave tomorrow. Regulators have warned that firms must not confuse paperwork with real control. Over reliance on accuracy metrics and false comfort from validation model validation remains essential. But validation performed at a point in time offers false comfort when models evolve continuously. Banks have frameworks to measure model accuracy, but less experience measuring interaction effects between agents. Senior managers may feel safe because models pass accuracy tests, yet the system may still drift into dangerous states. The FCA even warned that multiple AI agents reacting to identical signals could rapidly shift funds, accelerating the probability of a bank run. Several structural factors make banks especially exposed. Regulatory complexity. Banks must comply with layers of laws: SR 11.7, OCC 11.12, fair lending. Agents that act autonomously across functions can easily violate one law while optimizing another. Many institutions lack lattice-shaped talent professionals who can integrate mathematics, economics, risk governance, systems design, and institutional dynamics. Now let's lean into this for a second, because this is where we often miss the forest for the trees. I call this the Quant Human archetype. It's a bit of a funny term, isn't it? But it represents something deeply profound. The Aether Vector white paper argues that modern finance doesn't actually suffer from a lack of raw intelligence. I mean, we have enough PhDs in processing power. It suffers from a lack of integrated reasoning. Think about the way we've built our houses. Organizational silos keep risk management, product development, analytics, and regulation in separate rooms. In that environment, models drift, incentives conflict, and oversight remains perpetually downstream. So here is the all shucks reality of the situation. We've spent 20 years hiring quants to build the engines and humans to manage the strategy. But in an agentic world, the volume and velocity of this is just too much for that divide to hold. An agent doesn't see a risk problem or a marketing problem, it sees an optimization loop. If we don't have leaders, these quant humans who can speak the language of the algorithm while understanding the weight of the regulation, we're essentially flying a supersonic jet with a man and a compass. It's a bit of a tall order. I know. You're looking for someone who has the soul of a philosopher and the brain of a data scientist. But until institutions cultivate these cross domain integrators, these agents will continue to exploit the gaps between our silos. It's fascinating to the imagination, really. We aren't just upgrading our software, we're being forced to upgrade how we think. Real-time payments and continuous underwriting shrink decision windows. Agents operating at machine speed leave less time for human intervention. For boards and executives, the message is sobering. Control is not a back office function, it is a strategic capability. Leaders have to understand how risks accumulate when these autonomous systems interact. Marketing, underwriting, and payments are not separate departments. They are interacting economic systems. Boards should expect cross-disciplinary risk reports that describe emergent behavior across functions. If episode 04 is about why control broke, episode 05 will be about what replaces it. The bridge forward involves shifting control from approval to architecture. So, what are the key elements? Continuous monitoring and dynamic intervention. Build instrumentation that monitors agents in real time and can throttle or shut down an agent when thresholds are breached. In practice, this means kill switches. Number two, dual control and supervisory agents. Design agents that supervise other agents. For high stakes actions, require two independent AI agents to agree or require a human agent partnership. Number three, explainability and accountability. Require agents to produce internal rationales for decisions. Attach each agent's action to a responsible human. Number four, lattice-shaped talent. Invest in developing quant humans, professionals who integrate data science, economics, regulation, risk, and system design. Number five, cross-industry learning. We really should look at healthcare and aviation. Aviation systems use multiple redundant agents and pilot override mechanisms. These industries show that continuous control is possible when designed into the architecture. Over the next 12 to 18 months, adoption of agentic AI will accelerate. Gartner anticipates nearly half of financial services firms using agents by 2026. Banks that build architecture-centric control will win, for sure win. Those that cling to outdated governance mechanisms or models may find themselves exposed to systemic failures. We started with a simple observation. Decisions no longer belong solely to human committees. They now live inside adaptive systems. That realization forces a choice. We can cling to governance designed for static models and hope that our paperwork will hold back machine speed decisions, or we can embrace a new control architecture, one that recognizes that trust is an engineering discipline. Banks have not lost control because AI became powerful. They lost control because governance was designed for decisions, not for decision makers. Reclaiming that control will require new talent and a willingness to learn from industries beyond finance. It is a daunting challenge, but it is also an opportunity to build the future of finance on firmer ground. In episode 05, we will explore how supervision, accountability, and power can be reimagined for agentic systems. For now, I'll leave you with one last thing to chew on. When your systems decide, who decides the systems?